Hello everyone and welcome back to That Engineering Girl. Today I welcome you back into my kitchen because I want to bake chocolate chip cookies together. I found this recipe recently and I kid you not, for the first time in years I finally ate a homemade chocolate chip cookie that was actually how I wanted it to be in terms of like, you know, the crust on the outside, chewy on the inside, soft and like just supple and like nice. But anywho, that's not why I'm here. We're gonna be baking cookies together, and you may already know, obviously from the title of this video, that I'm also gonna be chatting about my first technical interview that I miserably failed, like destroyed, bombed, completely annihilated. Like it was a bad interview. So when I go through it, I want to talk about my learnings from it, and then I'm going to show you how fabulous these cookies turn out. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so I have my laptop here, which you cannot see, but the first thing that I need to do is whisk the dry ingredients together, which is the flour, baking soda, and salt. So let me get all of that together and then let's get into the story. Okay, alright, I have everything together and I'm just gonna whisk these things together with a fork. So like I mentioned, flour, baking soda, and salt. I'll probably link this recipe down below with the note that I put half the white sugar. It just turns out perfect that way. Anyways, so let's get started into the story. So I got an interview with Intel for a generic engineering internship. I told them that I was interested in a hardware position, but I honestly subconsciously expected it to be somehow related to software. I really wished it would not be, because in that moment of time I was not interested in an internship that was anyhow related to software. Like, I wanted hardware purely. So I low-key wish that there was gonna be no software, but I knew that there was gonna be. And this is gonna be a learning. You'll see what I mean. Anywho, once I got the internship, I set it up on their calendar and I had 1 week to start studying. Now, I spoke with one of my professors who I actually mentioned in the last video that I did like this, the one that I consider almost like a mentor. And so he was pretty familiar with Intel and its processes, and he directed me towards this textbook and getting familiar with VHDL, which is, you can almost think of it like a programming language, but it's not. It's distinctly not. But in layman's terms, you can think of it like programming and coding. So because my university is quite behind in terms of teaching students VHDL, he recommended that I get really verbose in that and focus my attention on that. So I actually took that to heart and I spent a week learning, going through that textbook and hardcore like learning VHDL, like going hard. But it wasn't at all optimized or anything. Like, I was trying to learn everything in a week, like everything digital. Like, I started looking at level shifters and I started looking at, I don't know, CMOS circuits, and I started looking at like like a bunch of different digital logic things, which is a lot. If you're in my field, you know what I'm talking about. There's so much that goes into digital logic, like it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. So I was doing generic studying, which I said this for a reason, another learning, which we will explicitly talk about. And I keep on mixing this for no reason. Let me do the next step and then I'll continue on in the story. So this is all mixed, and now what I need to do is beat the butter. Okay, I've beaten the butter. It was obviously very loud, so I did not film that. One tip for you is only use one, not both, because it's just absolutely exhausting washing both. That's done. I'm gonna add the sugars and then beat again. Okay, white sugar is in the house, so let's grab half a cup of this. But like I was saying, where was I? Yes, so I studied really hard Did not put a lot of attention on software because, like I said, I was really hoping I would get no software questions. And so then the interview came. Now, before I get into the actual interview, let's talk about how the interview is set up. So the interview that I had for the engineering internship, it was set up into 3 distinct parts. The very first one was software related. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that I had one interview with a person. You know, they book you with certain people. And so I was booked in with 3 people. And so I had a software interview question, then I had 2 hardware interview questions. I did not know this going in, okay? Let's be clear about that. So when I get in, he tells me his name, I think he says good morning, something like that, and we jump right into it, okay? Which I was not expecting because it is a very big company, Intel, so I'm sure that's how their process works, which is okay. It's just the first time that I was doing a tech interview, and I didn't expect us to just go like, hi, solve this question for me. Okay, so that was how we started off. So now he gave me a question, and I went in knowing that if I got a software question, I would be annihilated, because my problem was that I had not taken data structures, and I wasn't anticipating doing a software related internship. So I had not prioritized learning that stuff or even becoming a very good software engineer at that point in time, right? Like I hadn't practiced software for a bit. I did try to do a little bit of software when I was studying, but I did not really focus on that. Like I did it very briefly, and then I was like, this is not worth it, because I told them that I want to do hardware. That was my excuse, not a good excuse. I was fooling myself, but alas, that is what went down. And so when I got my software question, it completely wrecked me because I just lost my groove, especially because the question, now in retrospect, was a linked list question, which, like I mentioned, I was not familiar with data structures at this point. So I had no idea. Like I was racking my brain trying to understand, okay, like how would I solve this? How would I solve this? And initially when I chose that I wanted to do it in the C language, he was like, I would highly recommend that you do not do that, because you're gonna have to do a lot of work with pointers, which is absolutely true. I would have to work with pointers that were referencing other pointers and like of different lengths and so on and so forth. So it would be an absolute mess. And so then we went with Python, but I hadn't used Python in so long that messed me up even further and made me very anxious. So I got stuck in this loop where I would keep on asking him to explain the question to me, and at one point he even said, you know, you can do pseudocode, like that's all right. And I was like, okay, great. But because, like I mentioned, I had very basic programming knowledge at this point, I just could not think of a good solution. Like I could not come up with a solution with like how I was feeling, trying to keep myself nervous, and then trying to be like, okay, have I seen anything like this? So that session, absolutely wrecked, absolutely bulldozed. It was not good for my confidence. Okay, so we had the white sugar in. Hopefully I didn't put too much because I was talking as well, which is not good usually. I'm gonna put sugar back because that looks like a lot of sugar, which we generally do not like. We always put less sugar in all of the goods that we bake. I dealt with that mess because I put half of the white sugar in the original whole recipe. So now that I'm making half of the recipe, I needed to use 1/4 the white sugar, but I did not keep that in mind. Okay, so let's move on to the brown sugar. So that I need 1/8 of. So then I go into the second interview that I had scheduled back to back, just as an FYI. And so actually, let me just close off the first interview that I was mentioning. So I got nothing down. Like it was terrible pseudocode that I'd come up with, and it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. I came up with no solution in any way, like nothing that resembled like, you know, I'm making my way towards a solution. Like I was stuck in this loop of how on earth do I even figure out a solution? That's okay. That's okay. We live and we learn. Okay. So, and I'm putting it right in the bowl. Not a good idea for baking, but I've started it, so it is what it is. All right, so then I get to my second interview, and it's hardware, so I feel more comfortable, but I'm still a bit shaken from the software interview because I'm just thinking, oh my God, that was an absolutely terrible experience. I ruined my chances, so on and so forth. And so I get into the hardware, and this was a very fun question. Like, I love digital logic type of questions, so I had a good time, but I did not reach a full solution. I was working my way towards a solution, but in the time that I was given, I didn't get to a full solution. And that's because, you know, the interviewer was obviously asking me questions. I was answering them to the best of my ability. We also very briefly talked about processors and all right, so we had an intermission, the azan started happening, so I had to stop talking, but I did mix up the sugar and the butter until it was light and fluffy. So that's done. Now I need to add the egg and some water, ideally vanilla, but we are out, so that is not gonna happen. So let's add the egg, and I have an extremely large knife to do this. So I'm gonna add that and continue on with the story. So like I was saying, I did the second interview. It went much better than the first one. It was nice. Like, I was bouncing off ideas off of the interviewer and so on and so forth. I came to a brute force solution, I would say, but it wasn't the optimal solution because there were certain edge cases that my solution didn't address. So that happened, and then I moved on to my third interview. So before I get into that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna beat this and water. And then I'm gonna start mixing the flour, which is when I'll be back. All right, so at this point I'm gonna move over to a spatula because I'm gonna mix in the dry ingredients. So I'm just gonna make sure that I put the beginning into the bowl. And we are gonna use our arm muscles to combine those. So, while I do this, I'm going to talk about my third interview. So in the third interview, it was also hardware related. So he actually had a question for me that had two parts. So the first part was obviously easier than the second part. The first part I got done fairly quickly. The second part, I partially came up with a solution, and he tried, honestly, kudos to him. He really tried to help me out here. But I got stuck in this loop where I was like, I have no idea, like, I tried different solutions, different hypotheses and stuff, like different ideas, but it just would not get me to where I wanted to go. And it was the simplest thing, but obviously when you're in an interview environment, in a test environment, you forget the simplest things, right? So I did fairly well in that section as well. He had good feedback for me because that was my question for him. It's like, you know, what would be your feedback for me? And so that went well as well. The thing is though, I wasn't able to finish solving the second part of his question for me because I got stuck, obviously. But that was kind of overall the interview. I didn't get a chance to ask any questions or anything. He had maybe a minute and he's like, you know, if you have one question for me, go ahead and ask me. And so I asked him, like I mentioned, you know, do you have any feedback for me? But then it was like done, like offline, have a good day. That was the end. And then I went and held myself a pity party. That is what I did. All right, at this point, I think we're good to mix in the chocolate chips. I believe so. And at this point, what I'm gonna do is I'm also gonna turn on the stove. Okay, I'm trying to scrape the sides, but the more I scrape the sides, the more I get on the sides, so, interesting. Anyways, let me turn on the stove. I will be back. All right, so I'm back. We're gonna put in the chocolate chips and wrap this up. So before I get into lessons learned and what I took away from this experience, and I already have the chocolate chopped up, is I know you must be thinking, Ruha, that's not actually that bad. Like, you know, you did one interview poorly, but the other two, you know, were fairly successful. And in retrospect, I agree with you. But in that moment where this was everything for me at that time, it was brutal. Like, I threw myself a literal pity party. I'm not even joking. It was not fun at that time. Let's just say that. But what did I learn? Almost a year from then, now, I've come up with some takeaways. The first one being, you know, if you're going into a tech interview that's any whatsoever related to the digital realm, which mine was, if it's not analog hardware, like specifically analog power hardware positions, study your software. Do not question it, don't think about it, just study your software. You know, you're probably gonna have to interface with software in some way, so you should be comfortable and good at software development. So just study it. Don't be like me, who was like, I don't want to touch software, so I'm not going to even bother studying it, because that was me at that moment. Now I love it. Like, I'm working as an embedded software developer, if you don't know. But at that moment, I was like, I don't want to even look at software right now. So that was my first takeaways. Don't lie to yourself, because that's what I did. I lied to myself that, hey, I won't be tested on software. It's okay. I told them that I want to do hardware. I lied to myself, and I suffered for it, obviously, in the first interview, like we talked about. Now I'm going to actually put these on the tray, which is already lined with aluminum, and I've also oiled it with olive oil. So now I'm gonna just put these in. Let's see how many we can make. Now, the second thing that I learned is don't try to learn everything, especially if you have limited time. Focus and optimize your studying. Like, have a goal. Don't try to absorb everything at once, which is what I tried to do. I read the textbook, I did VHDL, I did some Python, I looked at level shifters, I looked at decoders, I looked at encoders, I looked at all different kinds of things. Like, it was absolutely insane. Like, I tried to learn the entire realm of digital logic, which is probably impossible for anyone, not even a newbie. Probably impossible for anyone, to be frank. So that was a bad choice and a bad decision on my end, and next time I have to study for something, I'm gonna focus my studying like I do for my engineering exams. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out, because I do that for my actual exams. I don't know why I didn't do it for this interview. So that was my second takeaway, is focus your studying. Don't try to learn everything, especially if you have limited time. Now, the third thing that I learned is I shouldn't have focused so much time on learning as I should have had on problem solving. Like, because my mentor, and you know, he gave me advice, I should have done my due diligence and stuff. I spent about 90% of my time learning VHDL. That's what I did, and going through that textbook to learn basic digital logic. When what I really should have done is chosen concrete problems and practice problem solving on them, because that would have really accelerated my learning. And to be frank, I was probably at that point in my life scared of doing that. And so I wanted to make myself comfortable, and so I decided to just read the textbook, because that is so much easier than racking your brain and, you know, being wrong in order to learn through problem solving. So that was another lesson learned, is, you know, learn through problem solving. Don't learn by reading a textbook. Like, that will seriously help you out if you're studying for something like this, especially for an interview. Now, the fourth thing that I learned is that don't forget that you're in an interview. Now, because a lot of the tips that I saw online were along the lines of, you know, don't be, you know, nervous, don't treat it like an interview, just relax, so on and so forth, because people usually go in nervous. I took that to the extreme, to the point where I almost acted as if I wasn't in an interview and I had all the time in the world, which is why I didn't solve the 2 hardware questions, because I was taking my time, I was brainstorming, I was thinking out loud. It was just, you know, it seemed, it was not, it seemed like I was, you know, having a walk in the park to the interviewers, probably. So what I've learned is, in a technical interview or in any sort of stress situation like that, stay calm. Do stay calm. But remember that you're in that situation. Don't forget. Don't actually fool yourself to that point, because it'll actually hurt you like it did me. Because I forgot. I didn't actually forget, but I didn't pay attention to the time then, which is why I ran out of time for both hardware interviews, which is unfortunate, because I think if I had more time, or if I had focused on, you know, that I was on a time constraint and I needed to focus on solving the problem instead of, you know, doing back and forth with the interviewer, or, you know, very thoroughly answering his questions, I should have been like, I gotta solve this, like 1 minute ago. I didn't let myself feel that urgency or that frenzy, which I believe disadvantaged me. So those are the learnings that I took away from this interview. And most of all, first and foremost, is at that moment, this was my dream. Like, getting this internship with Intel specifically, it was my absolute dream. I had been preparing for this since, I think, the end of second year, which was April. I had been preparing for an interview with Intel since April. Preparing to get an interview with Intel since April, networking and so on and so forth. So when I received the rejection and when the interview didn't go well, I was devastated, like absolutely devastated. But from a very high level, what experiences like this teach you is that there will be good times and there will be bad times, and both will go. Both your good times and your bad times are temporary. So enjoy the good ones and know that the bad ones will go away. And there's, you know, you're gonna go on to do something else that was for you. And now I'm in this position and I've realized how much happier I am in the embedded software developer position that I am right now than I would have been if I had gotten that internship, or if I was in, say, a hardware position of some sort. I'm just in a much better position right now, and I'm learning what I want to be learning, and I'm working in the intersection that I want to be working at. So, you know, even when you're devastated, tell yourself, we live and we learn. That's my new phrase for myself, and I say that all the time now. Whenever I make a mistake or something, I say, we live and we learn. And that's the, like, don't let that make you take things too lightly, but let yourself make mistakes. Let yourself do things wrong. Let yourself fail. That is the biggest takeaway from this experience for me, because it was so important to me at that moment. You know, getting this internship was so important. It was everything. Like, when I say everything, it was everything for me then. And not getting it, it just changed the way that I see failure, and it changed the way that I approach failure in a fundamental way. So those are my learnings. I'm going to pop these in the oven at this moment. I think they're good to go. We've made 6, and we will see how they look in a little bit. I'll be back. Okay, so I just got the cookies. Well, not just. I got the cookies outside of the oven. Let them cool while I prayed to Isha. And now I will show you how they came out. Okay, so this is how the cookies came out. They did not come out like I was expecting them to come out. And that is because I was talking to you all and I put double the water that I was supposed to, because I was halving the recipe. So these have double the water in them, and that is why they spread out a lot more than I expected them to be, and they're not as chewy looking, they're more poofy looking. But I did have a taste, and they taste just as good. So that's what matters. The taste is what matters. So I'm really excited to eat these. And that is baking chocolate chip cookies with me. I will link the recipe in the description below if you'd like to try it out with the modifications that I made. And I also don't think I actually added water the first time I made this recipe. And that's probably why they turned out different. So next time I make these, I'm gonna omit the water as well, and we'll see. Because the first time these came out, like, oh, I will never forget those cookies, ever. Anyways, I hope you had fun listening to my story about how I failed my first technical interview, what I learned from it, and with that, I'm going to go enjoy these cookies and I will see you in my next video. Until next time.